too. So, hey, all everybody. First of all, thanks to Jetbrains for providing us this location. It's an awesome location. And yeah, my name is Reyes. I came along from Vienna, Austria, as Thomas already mentioned. Also, Reyes without the E's on Twitter. So please, if you might want to follow me or something. I'm also a freelance engineer, mostly working with React and GraphQL. And at the moment, I'm contracting for a San Francisco-based venture capital called Perkins and doing like GraphQL migration over there. Yeah, besides that, I enjoy playing guitar, discover places and all that stuff. And yeah. So over the past years, I've been working for many different companies, like Volkswagen also, or Perkins on different like GraphQL projects. So all were mostly like the same. They were like, we need to like migrate our production app to GraphQL. So can you help me? And I'm like, it's like always like REST to GraphQL migration work. And yeah, I mean. After doing that all and like working with React and GraphQL, it's still so nice to work with that, and it's so great like doing this all kind of work, and I'm so in love with working in GraphQL. So every time I start working on a new project, I'm like, cool, yeah, sure, let's do it. Let's GraphQL all the things, and but of course not all at once, right? So you just start very small and make it like more and more incrementally, and but sometimes you get to the point where you have analyzed the existing data model and have created a mental model, and you're like, when you start a project, you're like, where should I start? And typically it goes like this. When you start with a new like GraphQL project, you know about some details about the project, like how the current state looks like, and then you have to create your mental model, like how is the schema structured, like how is it built, and all that has to be done first, and then comes the part where you have to install the GraphQL server, and then you have to configure your server, and then you have to set up your IDE. And then you have to install build and type system and configure the build and type system and so on and so forth. So you have to do a lot of things before you actually can start it. Can just start on running GraphQL. And eventually, after you have done that, you get to the point you can finally start like working on the actual GraphQL part, right? So you write everything down, and all requirements for the project and features, and you like get everything done, and at some point you're like, okay, I'm done, and then comes the next project. You do the setup again, and you write the code, get things done, and after all, several GraphQL projects, you realize, hey, wait a second, like I'm doing the setup over and over again, right? And you just realize I'm doing the same thing that I just did a couple of months ago, and you just realize I'm doing repetitive tasks. So, or you might also realize you're just writing boilerplates all the time, and I'm spending time on writing boilerplate code. And yeah, how can we fix this? So, before answering the question, let's define maybe like a list of tools and features that you want or provides you like a great foundation for writing GraphQL. And so the list is, first you need the GraphQL server, of course, which should be flexible and secure and scalable and optimizable. And then you need an IDE. So there is Playground now, which is something like graphical, but better now than graphical. It's just a tool where you can just put in your query and then see the output for testing. And also there is GraphQL imports, it's just where you write your types in type defs in a schema definition language. So it's an own language in GraphQL where you write down all the types and you basically just shape your schema. And also, you may want, while you develop GraphQL, you may want live reloading. So you don't want to like stop and then start the server each time you make changes in the code. And also, which is a nice, is you may want probably the latest ES6 features. So Babel is a good thing to customize all things that you want. So for the server, there's a great option from Prisma folks, which is called GraphQL Yoga. So it works on top of Express and Apollo server, and has subscriptions and GraphQL tools. It has like the approach, like the new approach where you have your resolvers and in one file or in one part, and then you have a separate part like the type definitions, and also it has GraphQL Playground right baked in the project. So here is a quick example of from the docs how you write like a simple server with GraphQL Yoga. So you just import basically, like you just require, and then you define your type definitions in the schema definition language. So this is a very simple. This is just one type. This is just query with uses hello as a field. And then resolvers uses all the types that you define in your type definitions. So in this case, we have query and the hello field that just returns a string hello, whatever you pass to the argument. In this case, is a name, and just returns it. And then you just instantiate a new GraphQL server and pass the type defs and the resolvers, and just run the start function to start server. So this is this is everything that you need for just like running a solid server in GraphQL, right? So GraphQL Yoga. With that, you have a nice and solid GraphQL server. You have a playground, but you need more tools to get GraphQL imports and live reloading Babel for that, right? So what else do we have? So there is also Apollo server. Apollo server is it gathered all the practices and the nice patterns that has been there around over the past years for like in the GraphQL ecosystem, and it basically supports everything that GraphQL Yoga supports, plus plus it has automatic persistent queries and schema monitoring like Apollo Engine and lots of other things like out of the box. So Apollo Server 2 is something that has been like GraphQL Yoga built something on top of Apollo Server 1, and then Apollo Server 2, which took all the ideas from GraphQL Yoga and make it even better, basically. that's all what Apollo Server 2 is about, right? So here is again a quick example. So same thing with GraphQL Yoga, you just import, and just require Apollo Server, and then define a type definition, so it's very similar. Then you have your resolvers, this is a very simple one, and then you just create a new instance of a server, and then you run the listen call instead of start call. So it's basically completely the same, actually. So same thing, server, IDE, you need more to do if you want the other like things in our feature list, right? So there is, this is actually badly positioned. It's Backpack, actually. So there is a tool, it's called Backpack. So Backpack is nothing but a build system for Node. It's like, the idea behind it is to have like a server that runs in Node and has like tooling with like live reloading, and where you can just customize like Babel features. And it covers basically that, and also has neat things like this friendly error messages, and it basically runs Webpack and NodeMon in the backend to run your to supercharge your tooling for the backend, right? So with Apollo Backpack and GraphQL tag loader, you basically get everything that we have on the list now, because GraphQL tag loader is a loader for Webpack that you can use with Backpack to have GraphQL import support. Like you can then use GraphQL, like the .graphql files, like the extension, to developing GraphQL, right? So this is really great. It's just a couple of nice tools that you get all and everything covered, but if you do this over and over again, you still have to look up and like what we need, and you have to install it. You have read down all the boilerplate over and over again, and to have to do the whole setup, sometimes you need to reiterate because you forgot it after a couple of months, and you have to check if everything works. And of course, we can probably do better than that, right? So what if instead of setting up the server and the configuration for all of the work, we can skip it and focus on just the important things. So what if we can just build the actual GraphQL code? And that's where Graphpack comes in. So what we really want is no configuration, and run a server by just a single command, and hide all the boilerplates. And all I want to do is just focus on these two things, right? When you're working with GraphQL, you want to focus on your GraphQL types with your schema.graphql and with its resolvers, right? So in general, you just want to focus on GraphQL. So what you typically do in your schema is just define all your types in your schema definition language. So in this case, we have now again type query, but now with article that describes how an article looks like as an object type. So it's the same thing that you do in your Yoga server or your Apollo server. And in your resolvers, which is under source/resolvers.js, you basically have the same thing that you have in Apollo and Yoga. You have your list of all your types, and basically here you describe where, or basically here is this is the point where just where all the real data is described, or where you're gonna fetch. So this is also the point where you put your Axios requests or your fetch requests or any connections with microservices or database. And Graphpack comes with two CLI commands. So one is just running Graphpack, and by that you get the development server started, and you have everything you want over there. You have live reloading, you have GraphQL import without doing anything. So by that I mean you have also when you have you have also the support for the new ES features, like the new imports, for example, and you don't without to configure anything. And the second command is the Graphpack build, which maybe too obvious, that creates a build for you. So after you're done with everything, or that's something that you put into your CI, that creates the build, and that has everything but optimized. And that's actually the point where just run in production afterwards. And the idea also is with these commands that you put it into your run scripts in your package.json file. So then you have just like a npm run start command or npm run build command for running Graphpack without doing anything else. So after that, you'll be able to just run it like here, and you get this nice output. Maybe if you're familiar with Next.js, it's the same thing. It's the same plugin that it uses, and yeah, you get Playground out of the box, and anytime you make changes in the code, it reloads, the server gets reloaded automatically, and the change is already there. And yeah, you get a nice output. We've seen that. Also, if you produce like an error, it has also nice error output, like here. So if anybody here, yeah, if you do any syntax errors or something, it's very nicely in the output. So that's Graphpack. You might consider using it for like faster or getting faster GraphQL development. So let's dig a bit deeper inside the source code and let's find out what's there. So we have the CLI. How did I build it, or how did I think about it? Like my idea was before I started like doing this project, I wanted to have exactly the same thing that like Next does. You just type in one command, no flags, no anything, and this is basically the whole thing that Graphpack does in the background. So if you don't have to read everything, but if you just focus on these parts, you see that Graphpack is just running Webpack and like in watch mode, and Node1 in the background. So Webpack is responsible for compiling the thing and running the watcher, and Node1 is taking care of taking the new changes and restarting the server. So Graphpack also takes care of the server part, so you don't have to write like what you would do in Apollo server or in Yoga, the part in the server. So which means this is also the main entry point in Webpack when you would think about it. So that's nothing fancy going in there. So this is just an entry point where, yeah, just the code that you just seen before. And if you focus more on this part, this is actually the part that you are writing when you are writing GraphQL code, right? So it's just the resolvers and type devs that we need from the user's folder. And there was actually, in my opinion, the toughest part in the project. So my requirement was that I wanted to support, like, if you think from a user's perspective, you have just the source folder and you need the resolvers.js, or you need to read the resolvers.js and the schema.graphql file. So you have the type devs and the resolvers. And I wanted to work that way that you also can use resolvers /index.js, and also for a schema that it supports schema.graphql or schema as a JavaScript file. For example, for the folks that want to use the type definitions, but with the GQL like template tag. And yeah, this is what I came up with. It's basically using, like the idea what it does is it's using the required context API, which is an API from Webpack. So it basically imports the files dynamically based on the path you are given to. So in this case, I just put in the Graphpack source directory from the user. So yeah, that was a very challenging part for me. I know it can be better. I try to like use a different API instead of the required context, because I know there is issues with jest testing that can be challenging for that. But if any of you has more like knowledge about Webpack or like the API, so please help is always appreciated. So to wrap up, this is Graphpack. It's a zero config GraphQL server. It allows you to run a server by a single command. It's built on top of Apollo server, so Apollo server is just running there under the hood. I've built it with TypeScript in mind, so any like if you're a TypeScript user, it's there ready for you. As I mentioned before, it's also has live reloading out of the box, so you don't need to set up anything about that. So no nodmon or anything. Yeah, ES features, so the ES imports is already there. Friendly errors, what we have seen before, and yeah, overall it just hides all the boilerplate for you, so you just can write your servers and your type devs and start from there. And, in my opinion, it was really great to work with. It's nice, it scales very nicely, and it just saves so much work for setting up before you start for GraphQL. Yeah, and it's all cool and all that, so of course you can use it now. And yeah, just check out the repository, let me know what you think, and yeah, as I mentioned, help is appreciated. And yeah, quick example how to install it, just yarn add, or if you're still on npm, just npm install Graphpack, and yeah, that's all you got. So yeah, here is a quick look into the documentation. So everything that I've just told you right now, you can also read here in the repository. Yeah, I hope you just enjoy and have a great time with that. And yeah, what about the client though? One option is if you use React, there is React Apollo, which does a great job on like supporting like having a nice foundation for GraphQL. And it's something also that I personally prefer when I'm working with GraphQL, because I like render props and all, and now it's hooks, so I think yeah, people are now like crazy around hooks, and like I also think that Apollo is working now on a solution for supporting that. And here's a quick dive on how you actually use a query. So you import query component and the GQL tag for yeah, just writing down your template string. And then you have your component, you use the query component from Apollo. And then what you get there is you get the render props data around loading render props. And if it's loading, you just return loading, and if it has an error, you return error. And yeah, otherwise you just use data and just map over the talks, for example, here. And yeah, just do your usual JSX thing. And I thought about that, like I wanted also to build something for like the client, and I realized, do I actually need to pass the query all the time when I use a prop? So what if I just use the GQL tag like here? And what if I just could, for example, if I just have my query in a GraphQL file, what if I just import it and then have the talks query as a component like that already there? So I don't need to write all this thing down, but I can just use talks query and use that like as a render prop component. So I think with that little tweak, you could end up like writing way less code, which leads to way less bugs, of course. And the idea is there, but yeah, it's just I just haven't found time to work on that. So you can find more details about the repo, about the idea to like import directly from a GraphQL file and have the component over there. But yeah, I just haven't found time to like implement it and yeah, and work on that more. So maybe if some of you is interested about that, I'll be happy to talk about you. Cool. So yeah, to wrap up my whole talk, here are the key takeaways of a building perspective. So in general, automate as much as possible repetitive tasks. Build tools to reduce your boilerplate if you recognize you're doing things over and over again, and it's just nothing that has actually to do with the actual project. You might want to create a tool that does that for you, or use an existing tool that does it for you. So it takes you some time away, and you get more time for doing actual other stuff or better stuff. And if your company or if your client allows that, try to make it open source. It's always helpful to get help from anywhere, because anybody from the other side of the planet might have the same problem, and he would be super happy if you have helped him. You never know. So it's always great, and it's always a great idea, like to make it public. And of course, when you work on GraphQL, you should basically write GraphQL and not anything else. You shouldn't like spend too much time on, like, for example, folder structuring or linting. Of course, it needs the setup first, but you should be focused. Like, you shouldn't spend a day for just thinking about bike shedding and all this stuff. And also try to do all the things which just leads to less code and less bugs. So yeah, that's all I basically got. Thanks very much. Maybe we can make a short Q&A. Maybe somebody has a question or something? Yeah?
So what if you need to configure your server? So for example, if you need to add like course stuff, or I don't know.
Yes, the question is, can I still configure my server?
Yes.
And the answer is yes, with Graphpack you can. So it's opt-in to have just only the source, like the resolvers and schema.graphql, but you can also, similar to Backpack, you can also add it's called graphpack.config.js, where you just export a function, and this function takes, I can't remember the API. I think it's, you can just return a Webpack configuration, and then you can, it's two things. It's a Webpack and it's a server, so you can return both. So the server is the server instance that you have in Apollo server, so you can pass more configuration to the server with the Graphpack config.js basically. Also, you can also add middlewares. So that's what things like Chorus is solved for that.
Yeah, thanks.
Right, yeah, thanks. More questions?
Yeah, I have more general questions about the migration project you're working on. So are you usually replacing the existing REST APIs with the GraphQL API, or do you put some GraphQL gateway in front of the existing APIs?
Yeah, it usually starts like this. When I start a project that replaces, or where you need to, what the project is, we need GraphQL instead of REST. Usually I start with wrapping REST first. Like, you have the GraphQL as a gateway, and then you wrap everything that REST covers. And at first it gets really, really ugly at some point, but after you have covered everything, and the approach is mostly you have covered everything, and then you slightly try to cover parts where you can just directly like communicate with the microservice, for example, and slightly go away from the REST communication. So also, when you do it like this way, you might have written down some tests first, and you're sure that you're more sure that it works after all. And the good thing about that also is when you do it like this way, that when you have your GraphQL server, basically everybody can work with that right from the start, and optimizing is something else. So to me, when when you need something, or when you need something built up very quickly, it's better, or it's easier like to start wrapping the rest first, and then caring about optimizing later. For example, if you need batching or caching, it's something that you can always do later afterwards. If you try to do that too early, it's to me in my experience it was never a good experience. So mostly it ended up then with yak shaving. You ended up with having more and more problems, and then you end up having not resolved the actual problem after you have like prematurely like optimized, like after you started like that. So in my experience, it's always a great idea like to make it as pragmatic or as simple as possible first, without thinking too much about optimizations. But once everything is settled down, I know at first it can be very not very optimized, because you still overfetch on the server side and all this stuff. But it's so much better when you have it set up and then think about the problem optimizing later. So that's my experience. Hope that helped a bit. Yeah.
More questions?
Thank you for the talk, and the question will be about the Graphpack. Is it possible to define, let's say, 5 files with resolvers if you want to split them by areas?
Yes, resolvers.js is just a simple like JavaScript file. So you can use it, for example, you can use resolvers/index, and then from there just import all your, for example, all your types in the way you want. So that's also what I do when the project gets bigger. So of course it's just how you usually like structure your component-based, for example, project. And it's the same thing with schema. So you have your schema.graphql. You can also use the import syntax. I don't know if you know that, where you just use the hashtag and then write import. So it's not in the spec yet, but it's possible. And also there you can just split it up, or you use the GQL template text string, which is again JavaScript, and then you have all the freedom of organizing your schema and the type defs and resolvers in your Graphpack source file. Yeah.
Question? So maybe from my side, do you have a recommendation for running GraphQL serverless, like on the edge, or just without any server, no server?
I haven't much experience about serverless yet. I know that site now, for example, has now updated their CLI, and now they skipped Docker files. And I know that Apollo server provides one repository as a function, like as a serverless lambda, I think, or something. So I would try that if I would need a serverless solution. So I think it's called Apollo server lambda, or maybe I'm false. I don't know, something like that. I'm sure that they have a serverless solution.
Okay, thanks again.
There's one more question. Maybe?
Is there another question?
No, I just wanted to contribute that.
Oh.
Actually, you can run, my company, we use Python for the backend, but anyway, you can use that directly and implement it as a Lambda function for AWS, and they also offer this kind of API gateway where you provide your SDL for GraphQL, and then you can hook into it like resolvers as you wish. So you can have different endpoints configured to be triggered if you come via some endpoint.
Okay, yeah, that's cool to know for Python. So yeah, Graphpack. I don't have anything set up for Graphpack yet, but I might have soon like a solution that supports different types of servers. That may also include serverless solutions. So yeah.
Yes. It's like we are like in my company we are using this GraphQL.
but have a real-time problem that I want to understand how this catching concept works. Like if you pass some ID, underscore ID from the Mongo database, if you refresh the query, how this how the GraphQL knows that we got a new data and it's updating, rather than updating whole data, to update only the specific record. So how this in background, how it checks this particular record is updated, and how does like React and Apollo interact?
There is, maybe you want to answer, right?
In Apollo you can configure how the hashing works.
So by default, it will take like the class name and the ID. Mongo obviously has underscore ID, but you can actually configure that. You can have your own algorithm determine what the hash is, by which it determines whether it's the same object or not.
Yeah, right. So React Apollo by default uses, like it normalizes all the data that you pass to. So it's called, so where it stores, it's basically the in-memory cache, which you use in Apollo. And what it does is, by default, it takes your type name, and then it takes an ID of this object. And you can see, or if you use the Apollo dev tools, you can see there all the different attributes that you have and what the values it has. So that's what happens in the front end in terms of caching. So if this exists, I think there are defaults how it's handled. So I think if it's already there, it just takes the cache and it doesn't do any network requests, I think. But yeah, it can be all customized from the client side. And on the server side, there is a thing called data loader that takes care of batching and memoizing, like caching requests. So if you have like duplicate requests, it's similar what's happens in the front end. It takes what's already there, and also if you have like an API where you can just pass multiple IDs, for example, to get all these objects for these IDs, and you have like in your resolvers you need like different IDs but separately. It gathers everything in your one API and does one request for you. So that's what data loader does, and also it makes this memoizing and caching automatically for you.